Now we're going to go ahead and continue with the topic of the day, American beer styles. So this is a really interesting topic to me. A lot of people find this very fascinating. And, you know, there are a lot of people who are, you know, especially immersed in craft beer culture who think, you know, that maybe American beer culture didn't really start until, you know, the craft beer movement of the mid 80s. But it goes back a lot farther than that, and it's quite interesting, actually. So if you look back far enough, really the introduction of beer to the U.S. came from Europeans who introduced ale to the colonies. There's a lot of written documentation of ale being produced by the colonists. In fact, you know, presidents made beer at home. It was quite commonplace. Before that, cider was really the popular alcoholic beverage. And so ale pretty much dominated beer culture, as it were, until the early 1800s. And then we started to see a large influx of German immigrants coming to the United States. And throughout the 1800s, this flood of German immigration brought with it lager brewing. A lot of these German immigrants were bringing lager recipes. In particular, a lot of them were bringing Pilsner beer recipes. And so they were making their lager beers here. And there were certain concentrations of German immigrants in the United States around cities like Milwaukee and St. Louis, that cities that we recognize today as having a long history of brewing tradition in the U.S. now. So these brewers were making lager beer here and really developed a German culture of brewing. In fact, through the mid 1800s and on to the early 20th century, beer brewing in that time period was largely considered to be a German activity. So that's how much the Germans really came to dominate beer brewing culture. And so, you know, this really influenced the direction of beer naturally. And one of the biggest ways we see this is in the development of the American lager beer. So this is the ubiquitous beer that we see everywhere and have for a long time, the beer that really dominated a good portion of the 20th century in United States beer culture. But this beer is a descendant of the original Pilsner beer. So we talked about this beer last week, a week ago on Tuesday, when we were talking about German and Czech styles. We talked about the original Pilsner, and we talked about the German interpretation of that Pilsner beer, the German Pils. Well, a lot of German immigrants were bringing recipes of their Pilsner beers to the US and making them here. And this beer started to evolve. And there were a few things that really led to the evolution of this. One was that the barley that brewers were using here in the U.S., the barley that was available had higher protein content. And this was significant because a higher protein content led to a cloudier beer. And in an era when many people were starting to use glassware drinking vessels, drinking vessels that you could see through, where the appearance of the beer made a difference to a lot of people. And the popularity of Pilsner beer, which was known to be golden and brilliant and clear, having a cloudy beer wasn't necessarily something that these brewers wanted. So in order to dilute that protein content they got from the barley they were finding here, they used other ingredients to supplement, to put into the mash. And the main ingredient that was everywhere that they used for this purpose was corn. So corn, when added to the mash, it doesn't have as much protein content. And so it dilutes the overall protein content and allows the brewer to make a more clear beer. So this was really kind of the start of using corn in beer. And so this had a very distinct characteristic to it. Corn doesn't contribute the flavor compounds to beer that barley does. What it does contribute is it contributes fermentable sugars that contribute to alcohol, that are turned into alcohol ultimately during fermentation. So by adding corn to the malt bill, the net result is that you're lightening the flavor of the beer. You're still producing alcohol, but you have less overall flavor compounds extracted. So this lightening of the flavor is one of the real characteristics of this beer. And as you increase the percentage of that corn, then you're lightening the flavor even more. So this addition of fermentable sugar, but not an addition of the flavor compounds, is really one of the hallmarks of this beer. So as the use of corn increases, and as this beer style develops, you start to see hopping rates drop, because if the malt flavor is dropping, then it just makes sense that the hopping rates would drop in conjunction with that. And so what you end up with is a modern day version now of this beer that uses roughly around 30% corn, and in some instances now rice. So rice became part of this equation as well. And so as this style evolved, it could be corn or it could be rice. And so rice has kind of the same net effect, that it adds fermentable sugars, but it doesn't add any real contribution to the malt flavor. So you have this very light beer, lightly flavored beer with very little malt flavor, very low hopping rates, so very low bitterness, no hop aroma and flavor. It uses lager yeast, which doesn't contribute any fermentation characteristics to the beer. And so what you end up with is a beer that really has no dominant flavor. And so the emphasis in these beers ends up being more in mouthfeel, crispness, and carbonation level. So this is a totally different style of beer that evolved from these original Pilsner beers. And so that modern version that I described is what you're going to find in like a Budweiser or Miller High Life or a Coors Banquet beer. Those are some good classic examples of American lager beer. So there's also a variant of this that's the American Light Lager. The American Light Lager is simply a lower alcohol version of the American lager. So it has roughly the same composition, about 30% rice or corn to supplement that malt bill, lager yeast, low hopping rates, so very similar flavor profile. Only we have a pretty clear cutoff of alcohol designation. So the American lager beer is a 4.2 to 5.3% ABV beer, whereas the American light lager is a 2.8 to 4.2% ABV beer. So there's a pretty clear distinction in alcoholic content there. And really, this is the difference between a Budweiser and a Bud Light, or a Miller High Life and a Miller Lite, or a Coors Banquet beer and a Coors Light. That's the American lager and the American light lager. So there's a variant of this style of beer that you'll find in a lot of countries around the world as well. And this is the International Pale Lager. So the International Pale Lager is very similar to the American lager beer in a lot of ways. Oftentimes uses a large percentage of adjunct grains, the rice and corn, rice and or corn. Only it has a little bit more body than these beers, a little more malt flavor, and these can be all malt. These can be 100% barley beer. They also will have a little bit more bitterness typically. But the emphasis with the International Pale Lager is still on carbonation. So some classic examples of this style beer, the International Pale Lager, might be Heineken or Corona Extra or Stella Artois or Asahi Super Dry. Those are some great examples of that style. beers that a lot of you are probably already familiar with. So the dominance of these beers, especially the American lager beer, as this really kind of came into focus post-Prohibition and the Great Depression and the World War II, these socioeconomic events led to a lot of different things happening in the brewing world. So as we emerged from all of this, this style of beer, the American lager beer, had a lot of appeal and really became the dominant style of beer in the United States. This was really assisted in a large way by the advertising age and marketing in the 1950s. And so we really see these beers kind of grow to dominate the scene. And at the same time, we start to see a lot of consolidation in the industry. A lot of brewers are buying other brewers. And so this happened in the middle part of the century until in 1978, there were a total of 89 breweries left in the United States. So that was a low point in this country. And then the next year, in 1979, home brewing became legal. Jimmy Carter signed the legislation that legalized home brewing. And people started to come out of the woodwork. These home brewers who maybe had been doing it in their garage or in their basements weren't really talking about it. Now this became a thing that you could do. People were writing books about it, and home brewers were beginning to maybe try and make a go of it and to be professional brewers. So it really started to promote beer brewing. And this is really what led to the American craft beer movement, is this legalization of homebrewing in 1979. So there were some early pioneers. One was Fritz Maytag of Anchor Brewing. He purchased that brewery in 1965, and that brewery had been around since the 1800s and was really promoting some fuller flavored beers, something other than the American lager beer. A guy by the name of Jack McCullough started a brewery called New Albion in 1976. He was only open for about 7 years, but he really kind of laid the groundwork for a small independent brewer who could take that kind of home brewing mentality and turn it into a business. And he inspired a lot of people along the way, including Ken Grossman, who started Sierra Nevada in 1979. So these are some of the pioneers of the American craft brewing industry. And some of the beers that people were making around this time were beers that we hadn't been seeing in a while. And these were primarily English ales. So this is where we really start to see that shift away from that German tradition into more of an English tradition. So if you were drinking beer at a brewery in the 80s or in the 90s, a lot of the beers that you saw on tap were American versions of traditional English styles. And one in particular that I want to start with is the American Pale Ale. So I mentioned Ken Grossman starting Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. And the first beer he made, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, was really a pioneering beer in American craft beer. It really introduced people to Cascade hops, that signature American hop that has kind of a pine needle and citrusy aroma to it. And so this was kind of one of the first kind of New World American hop varieties. So this was simply an American version of the strong bitter, as we discussed in the last session. The strong bitter is also known as an English pale ale. So the American pale ale is just an American version of the English pale ale. Only the big difference here is that it features American hop varieties. The English pale ale is going to feature the English hop varieties, but the American hop varieties that feature that citrus, piney, resiny characteristics, those hops are really the feature now. And this is a pattern that, as I talk about some of these other styles, you're going to see this continuing to emerge, that a lot of these American styles, really one of the main differences is that they feature American hop varieties. So this is roughly the same strength of beer as the strong bitter. Has a and similar flavor profile as well. The American Pale Ale versus the English Pale Ale. It's got a caramel or toasty malt flavor and a fairly prominent bitterness. Only again, that American version features those American hop varieties, and that's really what sets it apart. So, moving along and talking about other pale, hoppy American beers, we have to talk about the American IPA. The American IPA is one of the most influential beers in our beer culture today. So this, again, is an American version of a traditional English beer. So we talked about the English IPA last week. This is the American version that, as you guessed it, features American hops. So the flavors of American IPA are very similar to that of American Pale Ale. So it's going to have that same kind of caramelly, toasty malt characteristic. Only the bitterness of American IPA is much more intense. So it has a higher bitterness level. It has a lot more hop aroma and flavor. And that hop aroma and flavor is almost always coming from dry hopping. So we talked about dry hopping in a previous session. Dry hopping is where hops are introduced to the beer after fermentation. And this gives a bigger, fresher hop aroma. So that dry hopping is almost an essential part of American IPA. American IPA also has a little bit higher alcohol than American Pale Ale. But the flavor profile, again, is going to be quite similar as far as malt flavors and the focus on the bitterness. So there's been a lot of different offshoots of American IPA. And one of the most common that you see nowadays is what is referred to as the New England IPA, also known as a hazy IPA by some people. So this relatively new variant is quite different than American IPA. So whereas American IPA has a pretty distinct bitterness, this has a lower bitterness that focuses more on sweetness. So the hop characteristics that really kind of keep this within the IPA family really come from the dry hopping and the emphasis on aroma and flavor hops. So this has very intense aroma and flavor hop characteristics, usually with hop varieties that feature flavors and aromas that can be described as juicy. Oftentimes, there's a lot of similarities in that characteristic to actual fruit juice, like orange juice or pineapple juice, or even mango or tropical fruit flavors. These beers also are quite hazy in appearance. So they can be slightly hazy all the way to very turbid or opaque. And it's typically a protein haze that's causing that, as opposed to yeast. So we also have some unique American styles that feature darker malts. So these dark styles, we'll start by talking about American Brown Ale. American Brown Ale is, again, an American version of the traditional English Brown Ale. The American version is going to be more bitter. It's going to have some more hop aromas, usually featuring American hop varieties again, and it's going to have a richer malt character than the English Brown Ale. This is a similar strength beer to American Pale Ale. So American Brown Ale and American Pale Ale are similar in strength, only the Brown Ale has some of those darker malts. So you're going to have a malt characteristic that's going to be more nutty with some caramel notes and maybe even chocolatey. But it's not going to be overly roasty. A distinct roast character is really not a defining characteristic of an American Brown Ale. This is going to be more chocolatey or nutty in character. When we get into American Porter, now we've got an American dark ale that has some distinct roast characteristic. So again, this is an American version of the English Porter. The American version has more bitterness than the English version. It has more roast character than the English version. And it's also a little bit drier of a beer than the English version. So the American Porter is very similar in strength to the American Brown Ale and American Pale Ale for that matter. But this now features a distinct roast characteristic, and it has a bit more bitterness to it. But that roast characteristic really stops short of being really sharp or coffee or espresso-like. That's the type of roast characteristic that we usually find in stout beers. This roast characteristic in the porter is going to be not quite as sharp. But when we get into American Stout, now we're getting those sharp espresso-like roast characteristics. And American Stout, as we're seeing the pattern now, American Stout features American hop characteristics. And so this is very similar in strength to a foreign extra stout, only with those American hop characteristics. And then at the top of the ladder with these dark roasty American ales, we have Imperial Stout. This is a beer that a lot of people are familiar with, also known as Russian Imperial Stout. This was a beer that it's an English style ale. This is an American version of the English beer. The original English Russian Imperial Stouts were popular as export beers from England to Tsarist Russia. They became very popular there as an export beer, thus the name Russian Imperial Stout. Although today, even though it has its roots in English brewing tradition, most of the Imperial Stouts you see nowadays are American beers. So these are the strongest of the stout beers. Alcoholic content can go to 12% or more in some cases. And they, like all the stout beers, feature that sharper coffee espresso roast characteristic. This beer features an assertive, a very highly assertive bitterness, and it can even feature some dark fruit notes as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about American ales, American beers in general. I'm going to start the question and answer session now. And before I get going, I want to remind you that we are going to be posting a link to the survey. There it goes right there in the chat. If you want to win a free certified beer server exam, click on that link, fill out the survey, and you'll be entered to win. Please don't enter if you've already won or if you're already a certified beer server. Also, make sure you do this relatively soon. The link, as it says there in the chat, link closes at 3 p.m. So although we'll be wrapping up Q&A here shortly, this video, a video of this session will be posted on the YouTube channel, and that link will be in the description. It'll remain open until 3 p.m. Central Time. So go ahead and fill that out for a chance to win. Also, make sure you enter your email address correctly. We have had a couple of them bounce. Okay, so let's start with some questions here. So what is the difference between American lager and Mexican lager? So this is a pretty good question. So Mexican lager, as many American craft brewers are selling them, are essentially American lager beer. Now, there is a history of a style called Vienna lager, which is quite different than American lager. Vienna lager, for a while, was really, the only place you could find authentic Vienna lagers being produced were in Mexico. And I'm sure there are some beers that are promoted as Mexican lager that are versions of this Vienna lager. Some of the commercially available examples individuals of this from Mexico, like Dos Equis Amber, for example, is kind of descended from that original, from Vienna lagers. But most of the beers you see American craft brewers promoting as Mexican lager would fall into the BJCP category of American lager, or sometimes American light lager. Let's see. Can you tell us a bit about the California Common style and what makes it unique? California Common was formerly referred to as steam beer. So this is a beer that is really typified by Anchor Steam. So breweries don't call those beers steam beers anymore because Anchor has the term steam trademarked. But steam beer was popular beer on the West Coast in the 1800s. And this was a beer that that was unique in a few different ways. It used lager yeast, but it was they underwent warmer fermentations with lager yeast, so you still had some ester production. These were amber-colored beers that have some kind of caramel, toasty malt flavors, and they underwent some unique process steps as well. The cooling of the hot wort was done in a giant shallow pan called a cool ship that they still use today at Anchor. So that was a little unique process. And Anchor features a particular hop called Northern Brewer, which has kind of a woody or kind of a minty characteristic. It's very unique. So it's a pale amber beer that uses lager yeast, but has a low level of esters nonetheless. Let's see. Was the movement from lager to ale styles in craft beer due to push back on the ubiquity of macro lagers, or because it's easier and faster to turn around for home brewers? So I think both of those things were part of it. So ales are easier and more inexpensive to make in a brewery. They don't hold your tank space as long. Lagers take longer to make. And they're thus a little bit more expensive because they're taking up valuable fermentation space. So making ales was a little bit easier. And at the same time, a lot of the craft beer movement, yes, was built as a kind of departure from previous tradition, and some brewers might tell you it was even a rejection of previous lager beer brewing. So yeah, I would say both of those things would be factors. Is dry hopping unique to American styles? I would say that as we understand dry hopping today, yes, the way it's done with American brewing, it is unique. Although the addition of hops post-fermentation is not exclusive to American beers. So English cask ale has hops added traditionally right into the cask. That's and there are there's lots of documentation of IPAs having hops added post-fermentation. English IPAs, traditional. But the big, ultra-fresh hop aromas and flavors that people are looking for in American dry hop beers, I would say that is unique to American brewing. Question about Brut IPA. I've heard they're called Brut due to the usage of an enzyme to convert some unfermentable sugars. Also heard the name because champagne yeast is used. So the term Brut does refer to the beer being very dry. And that dryness is sometimes achieved by certain additions that can help to convert unfermentable sugars to sugars, certain enzymes that can break those down and provide more food for yeast and leave less residual sugar. So yes, And in some instances, I wouldn't be surprised if some brewers were using a champagne yeast, which can attenuate even further or ferment more sugars. So there are a number of ways that brewers could potentially achieve that really dry character. Next question. As far as the BJCP style guidelines go, does the milkshake IPA fall under specialty IPA, or is it categorized separately? I would say that specialty IPA would probably be where most beers billed as milkshake IPA would fall into. That is certainly not a beer that has a style of its own. If it could potentially fall under fruit beer, because most of these milkshake IPAs have heavy fruit additions, so I suppose there may be a fruit, you could enter it into fruit beer category. So there may be a couple of different categories you could enter a beer like that. Where do pastry stouts fall in the American style? So this is again another this very similar question. The answer might be the same. Some type of specialty category or a fruit beer would probably be where that would end up. What about cream ales? So a cream ale is essentially a very similar beer to American lager beer, only it's made with ale yeast. That's and so you're going to have a light, fruity ester component to that beer. But otherwise, this is going to be very light-bodied, oftentimes with the use of rice or corn. So very light malt flavor, low bitterness, and yeah, so very similar to American lager beer with ale yeast. What does the word imperial mean? Well, when we're talking about beer styles, because of the term Imperial Stout or Russian Imperial Stout, that the term imperial being associated with the strongest of those roasty beers, that term used in other contexts can refer to that beer being very strong as well. So the style double IPA, some people refer to those as imperial IPAs, and that's a reference to them being that much stronger. So it's really a reference of strength. Do they malt the corn or rice before brewing with it? No, the rice or corn are not malted, but they do have to be prepared in some manner. So they could be flaked, they could be torrefied, which is where they're heated until the endosperm pops open. They could come in many different forms, and the larger brewers that use rice or corn will often get them in a raw form or in a corn grit form, where they have to be cooked in a separate cooker, which prepares the grain for mashing. So they do need to be prepared in some way, but they're not malted. What is the best way to know if a beer is from America or from Great Britain? I find it very difficult. Well, so it depends on what you mean by whether it's from America or Great Britain. Like as an actual beer brewed in one country or the other, that's simply a labeling thing. But you do have some American style beers coming from British brewers, and you have British style beers coming from American brewers as well. So the British or American styles, so if you're talking about the difference between, for example, an English pale ale and an American pale ale, the main difference, the first difference to look for with those comparisons, a beer like that, would be the hop aromas and flavors. So what are the hop characteristics like? So those English hop characteristics are going to be more earthy or more herbal, and the American hop characteristics are going to be more citrusy or piney and feature flavors like that. Now, it's not exclusive to just those terms, But if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can refer to our Brewing Process and Ingredients Road to Cicerone book, which is available at the cicerone.org website, where we talk in depth about hops. You can also refer to the earlier webinar that I did, this CBS Prep Talk, where I talked specifically about hops. And we talk about the different characteristics associated with hop varieties from different regions of the world. So can you discuss the differences between West Coast IPA and New England IPA? So I discussed New England IPA earlier. So this is a hazy beer with lower bitterness than American IPA, a little bit sweeter, and it has very intense dry hopping aroma and flavor hops that feature juicy or fruity or tropical fruit aromas and flavors. The West Coast IPA is a widely understood variant of American IPA, which basically has, again, very intense hop aromas and flavors, not as intense as New England IPA typically, but featuring more of the piney, resiny type of hop characteristics. And they also tend to be very dry. The malt character is not very sweet at all. So the primary differences between those, I would say, would be the malt character of the New England IPA is much sweeter, whereas the West Coast IPA would be much drier. And the hop components, the hop aromas and flavors of New England IPA would be very fruity and tropical, whereas the West Coast IPA tends to feature more of that kind of piney, resiny characteristic. Let's see. Can you comment on any not quite true to style beers that you enjoy? German yeast and American style beers. Well, you know, I think in general, personally, I enjoy beers that are just simply well made, that have some type of balance and that are interesting. Beers that make me want to drink another one. And I think, you know, your suggestion about German yeast and American style beers reminds me of a lot of the variants of Pilsner beer that you see from American craft brewers. So they're variants of a German Pils. They feature they've got a clean lager yeast fermentation. They've got a nice cracker malt character from Pilsner malt, and these are very a little from the German versions. The German Pils has a very distinct hop bitterness, but the American versions of this that you're seeing in a lot of American craft brewers feature American hop aromas and flavors. So a little bit of that American hop characteristic and oftentimes a little bit sharper bitterness than you're going to get from a German Pils. When done right, that can be a really fantastic beer. Imperials equals stronger. Does that mean session equals lighter? So session is a term that many people use to refer to beers that are generally lower in alcohol. There's oftentimes much debate about what alcoholic content could be considered session or not. Essentially, it's a beer that's low enough alcohol that you can drink a few of in a session, so to speak, without becoming intoxicated. Why don't the American wheat beers have the characteristic clove banana flavors of German wheat beers? Well, this is one of the distinctions. So American wheat beers do not feature that banana clove character like German wheat beers do, and that's because they use a different strain of yeast. They use an American strain of yeast that's typically a low ester producer, whereas those German ale strains that are used to make a German Weiss beer give you big fermentation aromas of banana and clove. So it all comes down to the yeast that's used. How much style detail do we need to know for the certified beer server exam? So IBU, SRM, ABV differences. So if you want to know more about what you need to know for the Certified Beer Server exam, go to the cicerone.org website, get a free username and password, register, and then download the Certified Beer Server syllabus. That syllabus is your guidebook to everything you need to know to take and pass that exam. What you'll find when you go through the beer styles in there is that you do not need to know the BJCP upper and lower limits for IBU, SRM, and ABV. You just need to be able to describe them using everyday language. And the syllabus will guide you through some common terminology to use for that. Okay, well, that is the end of the question and answer session. I appreciate everybody joining in. Make sure you hit subscribe and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots of cool Cicerone content there. Reminder of a couple of upcoming events. Tomorrow, Master Cicerone Pat Fahey is doing his latest Tasting Together series. So tomorrow, May 27th at 4 p.m. Central Time, he's going to be tasting Imperial Stout. So pull out your Imperial Stout that you've been sitting on in your basement. A lot of people are cleaning out their cellars while they've been at home, or go to the store and buy some fresh ones. Grab yourself an Imperial Stout. Join Pat tomorrow, 4 p.m. here on the YouTube channel. And then Thursday, 2 days from now, join me for the very last CBS Prep Talk number 12. We're going to be talking about Belgian beer styles. So thank you for joining. Glad you all made it. And I will see you here same time and place on Thursday. Cheers.